Move. The order rang across the ranch like a gunshot. The feared Mafia boss seized the lead rope himself, after every handler had failed to load the oldest mare onto the auction trailer. The exhausted horse stood perfectly still, her trembling body refusing to give a single step. His patience vanished. As he yanked harder, the mare suddenly reared, throwing the powerful man backward into the mud, while dozens of employees froze in terrified silence. Before anyone dared react, a plus-size stable maid rushed between them and wrapped both arms around the frightened horse. "Stop shouting!" Her voice was calm, but it carried farther than his rage. "She isn't refusing to obey. She's refusing to abandon her foal." Only then did everyone notice the tiny blind newborn hidden beneath the hay behind the mare. For the first time in years, the ruthless Mafia boss realized someone had seen the truth before he ever did. The muddy splash on the Mafia boss's tailored coat stunned the entire ranch into silence. No one rushed to help him. No one dared. For years, everyone on Blackbriar Ranch had learned the same lesson. When Adrian Vescari lost his temper, the safest place was several steps away. The sprawling estate, hidden beyond rolling Kentucky hills, had once been famous for breeding champion horses worth fortunes. But after Adrian inherited the property following his father's death, sentiment meant nothing. The ranch was simply another business, another asset to be trimmed, sold, or rebuilt if it no longer produced profit. The horse auction scheduled for that afternoon would erase the last trace of his family's old legacy. Nearly every horse had already been loaded onto trailers. Only one remained, an aging bay mare with tired eyes, scarred legs, and a body that had long outlived her commercial value. According to the inventory sheet, she wasn't worth transporting back if the buyers rejected her. Feed costs alone exceeded anything she could ever earn again. To Adrian, the decision had been obvious. Sell everything. Start over. The mare, however, refused to cooperate. She had planted her hooves in the dirt for nearly 40 minutes, ignoring every command, every pull on the lead rope, and every attempt to force her into the trailer. Now, after being thrown backward into the mud, Adrian slowly climbed to his feet. His dark eyes shifted from the trembling horse to the stable maid standing protectively in front of her. She never lowered her gaze. Her work shirt was faded from countless washes. Loose curls had escaped from beneath her worn cap, sticking to her flushed cheeks. Dirt covered her boots, and straw clung stubbornly to her sleeves. She looked nothing like the elegant women who usually surrounded powerful men like Adrian. Yet she was the only person on the ranch who had dared shout at him. The foreman swallowed nervously. "Sir, she's new." Without looking away, Adrian asked, "What's her name?" The foreman hesitated. "Clara." Clara gently stroked the mare's neck, speaking so softly that only the horse seemed able to hear her. "It's all right, Maple." The mare's frantic breathing began to slow. Even Adrian noticed it. "You named her?" he asked. Clara nodded. "I named all of them." A few workers exchanged amused glances. Everyone knew she gave names to every abandoned horse, every rescued foal, even the old donkey that wandered around the equipment shed, as if it owned the place. Some found it ridiculous. Others secretly admired her for it. Adrian wasn't impressed. "They're livestock. They're living creatures," Clara corrected quietly. The words hung in the air. No accusation. No anger. Just simple certainty. Adrian had spent years negotiating with criminals, businessmen, and politicians. He could recognize fear in a heartbeat. Clara wasn't fearless. Her hands trembled ever so slightly as she shielded Maple. She was simply refusing to let fear decide what was right. It irritated him more than outright defiance. He stepped closer. "If there's really a foal, show me." Without another word, Clara knelt beside the thick pile of fresh hay, stacked against the back wall of the stall. She carefully pulled away several loose bales. A tiny movement appeared beneath them. Then another. The newborn foal struggled to lift its head before collapsing again onto the straw. Its coat was still damp from birth. Its legs looked impossibly thin. Most striking of all were its pale, cloudy eyes that stared into empty space. The little foal wasn't looking at anyone. It couldn't. Several stable hands gasped. One elderly ranch worker removed his hat. My God, I didn't even know she was pregnant. Clara wrapped an old blanket around the newborn before checking its heartbeat with practiced hands. She hid the pregnancy well, she whispered. Older mares sometimes do. Adrian remained silent. He had reviewed every financial report, every veterinary expense, every breeding record. Not one document mentioned this foal. His perfectly organized plan had overlooked an entire life. Clara looked up at him for the first time since the confrontation. If Maple had stepped into that trailer, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Everyone standing there understood. The mare had never been refusing orders. She had been refusing to abandon her blind newborn. One of Adrian's security men cleared his throat. The auction starts in less than an hour. Another added carefully, the buyers won't wait forever. Adrian stared at the foal. Its tiny ears twitched toward Clara's voice, even though its eyes couldn't find her. The mare lowered her head and gently touched the newborn's neck. Neither animal made a sound. The silence somehow carried more weight than shouting ever could. Clara finally stood. The foal needs a veterinarian immediately. The mare isn't going anywhere. There was no challenge in her voice, only fact. Adrian brushed the drying mud from his sleeve. Then he turned toward the waiting trailers. Unload the paperwork, he ordered. The ranch manager blinked. Sir, I said unload it. No one moved. Every employee wondered whether they had heard correctly. The most feared man on the property had just delayed a multi-million-dollar auction because a stable maid had refused to let him take one old horse. Before anyone could celebrate, Adrian spoke again without looking back. Tomorrow morning, you report directly to my office. He wasn't speaking to the manager. He was speaking to Clara. She tightened her grip on the blanket wrapped around the blind foal. For the first time since arriving at Blackbriar Ranch, she wasn't worried about losing her job. She was worried about something far more dangerous. The Mafia boss had become interested in her. The next morning, long before the sun climbed over the Kentucky hills, Clara was already inside the foaling barn. The rest of the ranch still slept. Only the soft rustling of hay and the quiet nickers of horses filled the chilly morning air. She carried 2 metal buckets, one filled with warm mash for Maple, the other with bottles, medicine, and clean bandages. The blind foal had survived its first night. For Clara, that alone felt like a miracle. She knelt beside the tiny colt and gently rubbed its neck before guiding the bottle toward its mouth. Easy there, little one. You don't have to be brave today. You just have to eat. The foal recognized her voice before it found the bottle. Its ears twitched. Its nose searched through the air. Only after touching Clara's hand did it begin drinking. From the open barn door, someone quietly watched the entire scene. Adrian. He had arrived nearly 20 minutes earlier. Instead of announcing himself, he remained hidden behind one of the wooden support beams. He wasn't sure why. He had summoned Clara to his office. Yet somehow, he had found himself walking toward the stables instead. She never noticed him. Her entire world seemed to shrink whenever she was caring for an animal. When the bottle emptied, Clara smiled. There you go. One victory before breakfast. She carefully recorded the colt's feeding time inside a worn notebook whose pages had been stained by years of dirt, rain, and fingerprints. Adrian stepped forward. You keep medical records yourself? Clara looked up, surprised but not frightened. The ranch doesn't keep records for horses nobody wants anymore. So I do. He held out his hand. May I see? She hesitated for a moment before passing him the notebook. Every page was filled with handwritten notes. Maple, arthritis improving. Favorite treats, sliced apples. Dislikes loud noises. Thunder, still refuses strangers. Scratches left shoulder against oak fence every afternoon. Bella, needs softer bedding during winter. Old knee injury. Even the oldest, weakest horses had their own pages. Some entries stretched back years. Adrian slowly turned another page. There were birthdays, vaccination reminders, weather observations, tiny sketches, personal comments. One line caught his attention. Today Jasper finally trusted me enough to sleep while I cleaned his hoof. Another. Rosie stopped trembling whenever men raised their voices. None of those notes increased the ranch's value. None would impress investors. Yet someone had taken the time to remember every small victory. You wrote all of this? Clara nodded. They deserve someone who remembers. Adrian closed the notebook without speaking. For the first time, he realized there were stories hidden inside every stall he had walked past, without noticing. A loud whistle echoed from outside. Breakfast break. Within minutes, stable hands gathered near the equipment shed. Someone spotted Clara carrying another sack of feed. There she goes. The horse whisperer. Several workers laughed. One younger ranch hand leaned against the fence. Clara. She looked over. You spend more time talking to horses than people. I know. You love horses more than humans. The entire group chuckled. Without missing a beat, Clara shrugged. At least horses don't insult my weight before breakfast. For 1 second, silence. Then laughter erupted across the yard. Even the older ranch workers couldn't hold it in. The young man rubbed the back of his neck. I wasn't trying to... I know. She smiled warmly. That's why I answered with a joke. The awkwardness disappeared immediately. Watching from the porch outside the ranch office, Adrian frowned slightly. Most people who had endured years of mockery became defensive. Clara somehow made everyone else feel embarrassed without humiliating them. It was an unusual kind of strength. Later that afternoon, the ranch veterinarian finally arrived to examine the newborn foal. After nearly an hour inside the stall, he removed his gloves and sighed. The colt's healthy. Clara released the breath she'd been holding. But her smile faded. The blindness is permanent. No one spoke. There may be surgeries in specialized clinics someday. He paused. But even then, the chances aren't high. After the veterinarian left, Clara remained beside the foal without saying a word. She simply rested one hand on its back. The colt leaned against her knee, as though it had already decided she was the safest place in the world. Adrian watched from a distance. You're disappointed. She nodded. I was hoping he'd see his mother. You can't change that. I know. She smiled sadly. But I can change everything else. He looked at her. What do you mean? I can teach him where the water is. I can teach him where home is. I can teach him which voices he can trust. She gently scratched beneath the colt's chin. Blind isn't the same as hopeless. The words lingered in Adrian's mind long after she walked away. That evening, while reviewing financial reports in his office, he found himself unable to concentrate. Every spreadsheet told him exactly how much money the ranch was losing. Every document recommended selling the remaining horses. Everything made perfect business sense. Yet all he could picture was an old notebook filled with names. Not inventory numbers. Names. A knock interrupted his thoughts. His ranch manager entered, carrying several invoices. Sir, we've calculated the losses from postponing yesterday's auction. Adrian barely glanced up. How much? The manager named a figure large enough to buy several luxury cars. Reschedule the auction next week? Adrian remained silent. The manager cautiously added, especially that old mare. She's worth almost nothing now. So is the blind foal. The buyers certainly won't. Enough. The room fell quiet. For reasons Adrian couldn't explain, hearing the colt described as worthless irritated him far more than it should have. The manager quickly changed the subject. There's another issue. The black stallion. Adrian looked up. Thunder? The manager nodded. He attacked another trainer this morning. Again. That's the third one this month. No one can get near him anymore. He'll have to be put down if this continues. For the first time all day, Clara's notebook flashed through Adrian's mind. Every horse had a page. Every horse, except one. Thunder. He stood and walked toward the office window overlooking the distant paddocks. Across the field, he spotted Clara, kneeling beside the blind foal. The little colt clumsily bumped into her shoulder. She laughed softly instead of correcting him. Nearby, the enormous black stallion stood alone behind heavy fencing. Unlike every other horse on the ranch, Thunder wasn't watching the people. He was watching Clara, very carefully. Adrian narrowed his eyes. The dangerous stallion had ignored every trainer for months. Yet now, it hadn't taken its eyes off the stable maid for a single second. The news spread across Blackbriar Ranch before sunrise. The boss is opening Thunder's paddock. Every employee abandoned what they were doing. Some climbed onto fences. Others gathered outside the training arena, whispering as if they were attending a funeral instead of a training session. Thunder wasn't simply a difficult horse. He was the reason 3 trainers had quit, 2 had been hospitalized, and countless others refused to enter his paddock alone. The massive black stallion had become a legend. Not because of his speed, because no one could control him. Adrian stood in the center of the arena, his hands resting on the wooden rail. Thunder paced behind the steel gate, ears flattened, muscles rippling beneath his glossy coat. Every few seconds, he slammed a hoof into the ground. A warning, not an invitation. Clara arrived carrying nothing except a grooming bag and an old paperback novel tucked beneath her arm. One stable hand frowned. That's it? No rope? No whip? No treats? She smiled. I brought something better. The workers exchanged confused looks. Adrian folded his arms. I've heard every trainer tell me they have a different method. They all failed. What makes yours different? Clara looked toward Thunder instead of Adrian. I'm not here to make him obey. I'm here to find out why he stopped trusting people. Several employees laughed. One muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. She's going to interview the horse. The arena erupted with chuckles. Even Adrian allowed the corner of his mouth to twitch for the briefest moment. Clara simply opened the gate. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Thunder immediately lifted his head. His nostrils flared. The enormous stallion stared at the woman walking calmly toward him. No ropes, no commands, no fear. She stopped nearly 20 feet away. Then, she sat down. Right in the dirt. The crowd fell silent. Instead of looking directly at Thunder, Clara pulled the old novel from her bag and opened the first page. She began reading aloud. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just softly enough that her voice drifted through the morning air. The stallion watched her. 1 minute passed, then 5, then 10. Nothing happened. Thunder remained exactly where he was. Clara never tried to approach him. She simply turned another page. Around the arena, the whispers returned. She's wasting time. This is ridiculous. I told you she was crazy. Adrian said nothing. He couldn't understand what he was watching. Every trainer before had treated Thunder like a problem to solve. Clara behaved as though she were sharing a quiet afternoon with an old friend. Finally, she closed the book. See you tomorrow. She stood, walked out of the paddock, closed the gate behind her. That was all. One of the ranch hands burst into laughter. That's your training session? You sat there reading stories. Clara shrugged. He listened. The man laughed even harder. He didn't move. He didn't attack me either. The laughter stopped. That afternoon, Adrian found Clara brushing maple beside the foaling barn. You accomplished nothing. She continued brushing. I accomplished exactly what I planned. And what was that? I left before he felt trapped. Adrian frowned. You think he noticed? She looked at him. I know he noticed. For the next several days, the same routine repeated. Every morning. Same time. Same place. Clara entered Thunder's paddock. Sat down. Read a chapter. Sometimes she sang quietly instead. Sometimes she simply brushed the grass beside her. She never demanded anything. She never reached toward him. She never even tried to touch him. The ranch workers had started making jokes. Maybe tomorrow she'll knit him a sweater, or invite him to tea. Even Adrian couldn't deny how absurd it looked. Yet something was changing. On the fourth morning, Thunder stopped pacing. On the fifth, he remained lying down while Clara read. On the sixth, he took 3 slow steps closer before stopping again. No one mentioned it, but everyone noticed. The jokes became less frequent. On the 7th day, heavy rain swept across the ranch. Most employees hurried indoors. Clara still walked toward Thunder's paddock, carrying an umbrella and her battered novel. Adrian watched from the stable doorway. You're still going? He doesn't know it's raining because I cancelled. She smiled. He'll be waiting. When she entered the paddock, Thunder was already standing near the center. For the first time, he didn't keep his distance. He simply watched. Clara sat beneath the umbrella and began reading. Rain tapped softly against the fabric overhead. The black stallion lowered his head. One slow step, then another, another. Every employee holding shelter beneath the barn roof forgot they were getting wet. Thunder was walking directly toward her. Clara kept reading. She never looked up. When the stallion stopped only a few feet away, she quietly turned another page. Thunder stretched his neck, sniffed the air, then retreated again. A disappointed sigh spread through the watching crowd. He almost did it. Almost. Clara simply packed away her book. See you tomorrow. Again, she left without touching him. Adrian finally caught up with her outside the paddock. You had the chance. You could have reached him. She shook her head. No, I could have reached for him. That's different. The answer stayed with Adrian all night. The following morning, nearly the entire ranch gathered before sunrise. Nobody admitted why. They simply arrived. Thunder stood quietly inside the paddock, almost waiting. Clara entered as always. She placed the book beside her, but instead of opening it immediately, she looked toward the stallion. Good morning. There was no response, only silence. She smiled anyway. I missed you yesterday after I left. Then she began reading. 5 minutes later, the stallion started walking. No hesitation, no nervous pacing, just calm, deliberate steps. 1, 2, 3. The arena became so quiet that birds landing on the fence sounded loud. Thunder stopped beside Clara. She continued reading. The enormous horse lowered his head. Everyone held their breath. Without warning, he rested his forehead gently against her shoulder. No force, no fear, just trust. Clara slowly closed the book. She didn't hug him. She didn't celebrate. She simply placed one careful hand against his neck. Hello, handsome. A stable hand dropped his coffee mug. Another crossed himself. Someone whispered, I don't believe this. Adrian couldn't take his eyes off the scene. The horse that had terrified every professional trainer on the ranch had chosen Clara, not because she had conquered him, because she had never tried to. Thunder suddenly turned his head. His dark eyes settled on Adrian. The Mafia boss remained perfectly still. For several long seconds, neither man nor horse moved. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Thunder took 3 slow steps toward the fence separating him from Adrian. He stopped just within arm's reach. No pinned ears, no threat, no anger. Behind him, Clara smiled. I think he's ready to meet you. When Adrian stepped through Thunder's gate, every conversation around the arena stopped. No one blinked. No one moved. The enormous stallion remained beside Clara, his head still resting comfortably near her shoulder. For years, Thunder had charged at anyone who crossed into his space. Ranch hands had learned to read the warning signs, the flattened ears, the tense muscles, the sharp snort before an attack. None of those signs appeared now. Clara looked at Adrian. Don't try to prove you're stronger. I'm not. Don't try to make him trust you. Adrian frowned. Then what am I supposed to do? She smiled. Introduce yourself. The answer sounded ridiculous. Yet after everything he had witnessed over the past week, Adrian no longer dismissed anything she said. He stopped several feet away from Thunder. Instead of reaching for the horse, he stood quietly, with his hands at his sides. Thunder watched him. So did everyone else. Several long seconds passed before Clara spoke again. You're staring at him like you're negotiating a business deal. Adrian glanced sideways. I negotiate business deals every day. I know, but horses don't. A few stable hands tried, and failed, to hide their laughter. Clara picked up a stiff grooming brush and held it toward Adrian. Here? He looked at it as though she'd handed him a strange tool from another planet. I've never brushed a horse. It shows. More laughter rippled through the stable. Even Adrian couldn't argue. He accepted the brush. What now? Let him decide if today is the day. Adrian raised an eyebrow. And if he says no, then today's lesson is patience. Slowly, Clara stepped away. Thunder's attention shifted between the two humans. Adrian resisted every instinct telling him to move closer. For the first time in his adult life, he waited for permission instead of taking control. Nearly a minute later, Thunder closed the distance himself. Only one step, but it was enough. Good, Clara whispered. Now brush his shoulder. Adrian lifted the brush awkwardly. The first stroke was stiff. The second was worse. Thunder flicked his tail against Adrian's expensive jacket, covering it with dust and loose hair. The watching employees burst into laughter. One ranch hand couldn't help himself. Boss? I think he likes your suit more than you. Adrian looked down at his once perfect coat. Horsehair clung to every sleeve. Dust covered the front. He sighed. I paid more for this jacket than you paid for your truck. Clara tilted her head. The jacket won't remember. Thunder will. For reasons he couldn't explain. Adrian smiled. It wasn't forced. It wasn't polite. It simply happened. The stable fell silent again. The oldest ranch workers exchanged surprised glances. Some had worked for the Vescari family for nearly 30 years. None of them could remember seeing Adrian genuinely smile. Not after his father's death. Not after taking over the organization. Not ever. From that morning on, his routine quietly changed. Every day before heading into meetings, he visited the stables. Officially, he was inspecting the ranch. Unofficially, everyone knew better. One morning, Clara found him standing outside Maple's stall with a notebook in his hand. What are you doing? I'm making records. She looked over his shoulder. The page read, Maple, likes apples. Protective mother, dislikes loud voices. Clara bit her lip, trying not to laugh. You forgot something. What? She steals carrots from the wheelbarrow whenever nobody's looking. Adrian wrote it down. Anything else? She pretends not to know she's doing it. He nodded seriously. I'll note that too. She laughed so hard she had to grab the stall door for support. Across the barn, several workers stopped shoveling hay just to watch. One whispered, "Did she just make the boss right that a horse lies about stealing carrots?" Another answered, "He actually wrote it." A few days later, Adrian decided he was ready to feed Thunder by himself. Clara handed him a bucket. "Don't rush." "I won't." He stepped into the paddock confidently. Thunder walked over. Adrian smiled. "This is going well." Before Clara could answer, the stallion grabbed a mouthful of hay and shook his head. A shower of dry grass exploded directly into Adrian's face. Hay stuck in his hair, his jacket, even his eyebrows. For 2 seconds, absolute silence. Then Clara laughed. Not a polite chuckle. A full, uncontrollable laugh that echoed through the barn. She tried to stop, failed, covered her mouth, failed again. Soon the stable hands joined in. Even the ranch manager turned away to hide his grin. Adrian slowly removed a piece of hay from his ear. "I assume this is normal." Clara wiped tears from her eyes. "For Thunder? Very. For you? Extremely." He looked at the horse. "You planned that." Thunder calmly resumed eating, as if nothing had happened. Adrian shook his head. "I've negotiated with cartel leaders. I've survived assassination attempts. I've never been humiliated by a horse." Clara smiled. There's a first time for everything. The teasing continued over the following weeks. Whenever Adrian approached too confidently, Thunder found a new way to remind him who truly controlled the conversation. Sometimes he stepped sideways at the last second, forcing Adrian to stumble. Sometimes he nudged him away from Clara with his shoulder. Other times, he simply walked between them whenever they stood talking. One afternoon, Adrian reached for a brush at exactly the same moment Clara did. Their hands touched. Neither spoke. Neither pulled away immediately. Thunder noticed. The stallion calmly walked forward and pushed his enormous head directly between them. Adrian stumbled backward. Clara laughed. Thunder looked remarkably pleased with himself. Adrian stared at the horse. "I think he's doing that on purpose." "Oh, he is. You can tell? He only interrupts people he likes." Adrian looked unconvinced. "That's his version of liking me?" Clara nodded. Imagine what he'd do if he didn't. For the first time in years, the ranch no longer felt like a business. Employees lingered after work. Children from neighboring farms came to visit the rescued horses. The old barns seemed louder, warmer, more alive. The changes reached beyond the animals. Stable hands who barely spoke before now shared lunch together. Arguments became conversations. Orders became requests. Even the horses seemed calmer. One evening, the rancher's elderly caretaker watched Adrian brushing Thunder under the setting sun. Clara stood nearby, quietly repairing a leather halter. The old man smiled to himself before speaking. "You know, neither of them looked up. The horses weren't the ones she was taming. You were." The words settled over the paddock. Adrian paused in the middle of brushing. For once, he didn't deny it. He wasn't becoming weaker. He was becoming someone he barely recognized. And, to his surprise, he didn't miss the man he used to be. Just as the peaceful silence settled over the ranch manager came running across the yard, a thick folder clutched tightly in his hands. His face was pale. "Mr. Vescari, you need to see this immediately." Adrian opened the folder. The first page displayed a purchase offer unlike anything Blackbriar Ranch had ever received. A national real estate corporation wanted to buy the entire property. Every pasture, every stable, every acre of land. The number printed at the bottom of the page was so large that even Adrian stared at it for several silent seconds. Across the paddock, Clara gently scratched Thunder behind his ears, completely unaware that the future of the ranch, and every horse she had fought to protect, had just changed again. The conference room overlooking Blackbriar Ranch had never been so quiet. 7 executives from the real estate corporation sat across from Adrian, their presentation glowing on a large screen. Luxury resorts, private villas, an exclusive golf course. Every slide erased another piece of the ranch. The old stables would become a boutique hotel. The paddocks would become parking lots. The rolling fields where generations of horses had run free would disappear beneath concrete. The lead executive smiled confidently. "We're prepared to close immediately." He slid the contract across the polished table. "The offer is significantly above market value." Several advisors around Adrian nodded. "It would be the smartest financial decision. The ranch has been losing money for years. This solves everything." Adrian remained silent. Only a few months earlier, he would have signed without reading the second page. That was the man everyone knew, the man who measured every decision by profit. His fingers rested on the pen. The room waited. Before the tip touched the paper, his eyes drifted toward the wide window. Far beyond the meeting room, he could just make out the eastern pasture. A familiar figure sat beneath the old oak tree. Clara. She wasn't working. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply sat in the grass while the blind colt rested beside her. Maple grazed nearby. Thunder stood only a few feet away, quietly watching over both of them. Several other rescued horses wandered closer until they formed a loose circle around her. None of them had been called. They had simply chosen to be there. Without realizing it, Adrian remembered something Clara had said weeks earlier while repairing a broken fence. Some things stop making money, but they never stop giving life. At the time, he had dismissed the sentence as sentiment. Now, looking through the window, he finally understood it. The executive cleared his throat. "Mr. Viscari, the contract." Adrian looked down at the signature line. Then he slowly closed the folder. "I'm not selling." The room froze. One advisor leaned forward. "Perhaps you'd like more time. I've made my decision." The executive forced another smile. "We're willing to increase the offer. It isn't about the money." Silence. No one had ever heard Adrian Viscari say those words. Not once. The meeting ended less than 5 minutes later. News traveled quickly. By sunset, every employee on the ranch had heard the unbelievable rumor. The ranch wasn't being sold. Nobody understood why. The following morning, reporters crowded outside the front gates. Television cameras lined the entrance road. Everyone expected Adrian to announce a partnership with the corporation. Instead, he stepped behind the podium alone. Flashes from dozens of cameras lit the morning sky. One reporter spoke first. "Mr. Viscari, is it true you rejected the largest offer ever made for this property?" "Yes." A second reporter frowned. "Can you explain why?" Adrian paused. Behind the crowd, beyond the cameras, Clara stood quietly beside the fence with Maple, Thunder, and the blind colt. She had no idea he could see her. He smiled. A genuine smile. The same one that had first appeared beneath a cloud of horsehair and laughter. Then he answered, "Because someone reminded me that not everything valuable can be counted." The statement made headlines across the state before noon. Some business analysts called him reckless. Others called him sentimental. For the people who worked at Blackbriar Ranch, he had simply become human. Life slowly returned to its peaceful rhythm. The auction notices disappeared. Construction surveys were cancelled. Fresh hay replaced stacks of legal documents. Children visited the ranch every weekend to meet the rescued horses. The blind colt learned every trail by memory, following the sound of Clara's footsteps wherever she walked. Even Thunder seemed calmer than anyone had ever believed possible. A week later, Clara quietly packed the few belongings she kept inside the small apartment above the stable. Her notebook, a family photograph, several worn novels. She folded her work shirts into an old suitcase. A soft knock sounded on the door. She turned. Adrian stood outside, holding something behind his back. "I thought you'd already be gone." She smiled nervously. "I figured. Now that the ranch is staying open, you'd probably hire someone more qualified." He stepped inside without answering. Then he placed a carefully carved wooden sign on the table. Clara stared at it. The words had been carved by hand. "Head of the ranch." For several long seconds, she couldn't speak. "You trust me with all these horses?" Adrian slowly shook his head. "No." She blinked. His expression softened. "I trust the horses. They chose you. Long before I did." Tears filled Clara's eyes before she could stop them. She laughed softly through them. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to." At that exact moment, thunder wandered through the open stable door. The enormous stallion walked straight toward them. Neither human moved. Thunder stopped between them, looked at Adrian, then calmly pushed him backward with his head. Just one gentle shove, enough to make him take an unwilling step. Clara burst into laughter. "So, you still haven't won him over?" Adrian looked at the stallion, who seemed completely satisfied with himself. He sighed dramatically. "I think he's still jealous." As if agreeing, Thunder moved even closer to Clara. She reached up to stroke his neck before extending her free hand toward Adrian. This time, Thunder watched carefully. But he didn't interfere. Adrian smiled as he took her hand. Outside the stable, the afternoon breeze swept across the open fields. Maple trotted past with her blind colt, confidently following the familiar sound of her footsteps. One by one, the rescued horses began running across the green pasture together. No trailers waited at the gates. No auction signs hung from the fences. No shouted orders echoed through the barns. Only the rhythmic sound of hooves rolling across the Kentucky hills. The man who had once believed everything could be bought had finally discovered something priceless. Not through power, not through fear, but through a woman who saw value in every forgotten life, and taught him that the most wounded hearts, whether they belonged to people or horses, were often the ones most deserving of love.